Vice President Kamala Harris is yet to concede defeat. For now, though, let's cross live to Washington, D.C., where my colleague Xoli Mngambi has been following developments for us on the ground. Now, that's the state where Kamala Harris spent the last hours of her campaign, Xoli, and from where she is expected to speak, while, of course, conceding defeat. But at the moment, any sign of her, or whether, in fact, she will be doing that anytime soon? And perhaps more importantly, how has Trump's victory been received by the Democrats' stronghold?
Well, Vuyo, good afternoon to you. And as you mentioned, the Vice President and the Democratic presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, has yet to concede defeat. The understanding is that her team may possibly be putting together a statement, and that could come at any moment. But at the moment, no indications really as to when Kamala Harris might come out to make that concession speech. But Vuyo, from the Democratic camp, it has to be said that 4 years after he was dislodged from the presidency, in part because of what happened just across from us at the Capitol Hill, when his supporters simply wouldn't accept that he had lost the election in 2020, he has made a return 5 months, Vuyo, after he was convicted at a court in New York, and 3 months after surviving an assassination attempt. Donald Trump makes a remarkable return to the Oval Office here in Washington, D.C. I'm not going to talk for much longer for you. I have with me our senior Washington correspondent, Simon Marks, who is going to fill us in on exactly what happened here. Simon, good morning. Our time.
What a day.
Let's talk about this decisive victory, because that's what it is.
Absolutely.
Simon Marks. It's a decisive victory. What was going on in the mind of the ordinary American as they went out to vote?
Well, American voters in large numbers have simply deserted the Democrats, and the pollsters absolutely did not see the scale of this Donald Trump victory coming. There are lots of numbers flying around here, as you can imagine, in the immediate aftermath of this election. In 2020, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won the support of 81 million Americans. 81 million Americans 4 years ago. Last night, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz won the support of 66 million Americans. That means 15 million Americans have disappeared. They have evaporated from the Democratic side of the aisle. Donald Trump won the support last time round of around 75 million. It looks like he's going to end up with 72, 73 million. Yeah. So his vote held up. The Democrat vote collapsed, and that can only mean that many of those voters simply decided to sit it out or to cast ballots for third-party candidates. Some of them will have undoubtedly shifted their allegiance to Donald Trump. But it is an absolutely astonishing knockback for the Democrats. They haven't only lost the keys to the Oval Office. Donald Trump is going to definitely be working with a Republican-dominated Senate. The Republicans have now flipped the Senate and won a majority there. And we think that by the time the rest of the votes are counted in the House of Representatives, they may well have the trifecta: the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, with a 6-3 Republican majority already in the Supreme Court. Donald Trump is going to walk into that Oval Office on January the 20th of next year, and he is going to be able to do anything that he wants and get it done.
I'm glad you mentioned that this election is not only about the presidency, but it's also about the other arms of the state. Let's then look into what could potentially be the first order of business for Donald Trump. As you mentioned, apparently it's been decades since the Republican Party won the popular vote. When we talk about the popular vote, we have to separate these two. There is the Electoral College, and that is primarily responsible for putting him in here. And then there's the popular vote.
Yes, correct, exactly.
Right. So let's talk then about what the first order of business is going to be once he sets foot in office. Let's start domestically.
Well, he's been very clear. I mean, he's all about protecting borders, he's about restoring security, and that, he says, is going to mean the largest mass deportation of migrants from this country in American history.
By the way, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, the mass deportation, the person who, according to opinion makers, holds the record for now is President Obama.
Yes, absolutely. But Donald Trump is talking about deportation on an enormous scale. Hundreds of thousands of migrants are threatened and are now, tonight, as of last night, every single night living with this uncertainty of what is going to happen to them. And just to be clear, Donald Trump has already assembled the officials that he is going to put into place to carry this out. The difference between 2016 and 2024, 2025 as it will be, is that Donald Trump believes that in 2016 his mistake was to try and find common cause and try and engage in concessions with Washington careerists, members of the Washington elite, people who didn't necessarily agree with him. Yeah. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, for example, foisted on him by former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He doesn't want any of those people. He doesn't want the James Comeys from the FBI. He's going to fill these positions with Trump loyalists. So domestically, deportations, mass deportations, he's promised it. He will be under enormous pressure to fulfill it. Extending the border wall between the United States and Mexico. And then internationally, he's talking about ending the war in Ukraine on the first day that he's in office. That's going to make very difficult nights of sleep ahead for President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine, because Donald Trump's going to force President Zelensky to give some territory to Russia in a bid to try and resolve the conflict there.
By the way, Zelensky was among the first leaders to congratulate him.
As was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. I think the first was Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, with whom Donald Trump has been speaking over the last several weeks. Yeah. And in the same way as Donald Trump says he's going to fix the war in Gaza, in Ukraine, he also says he's going to fix the war in Gaza. And his relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu is clearly going to be extremely worrying as far as Palestinians and their supporters are concerned around the world.
Talking about the American influence in world politics, NATO has also put out a statement congratulating President Trump. But did you read anything into that statement? The language is what I'm interested in.
Absolutely. I mean, it was basically, it was almost a memo to Donald Trump, wasn't it? Extolling the reasons for NATO's existence and why the United States ought to remain engaged in NATO. His advisors have been asked again and again and again, is he going to pull America out of NATO? He's been asked the question. When he's asked it, he just smiles and doesn't answer it. He's probably not going to pull the United States out of NATO, but he is certainly going to insist that NATO members devote more of their GDP to their own defense. Right. This Trump administration does not want to be embroiled in the affairs of Europe. They want to focus their foreign policy fire firmly on China, and they want to decouple from Europe, and they're going to say to European governments, you sort out all of that stuff, you sort out Ukraine, you pay for your own defense, we're off because we've got to go and deal with the national security threat that they say China poses to the United States.
Let's move to the continent,
of course,
of Africa, where I come. President Ramaphosa, as we mentioned, world leaders congratulating President Trump this morning. He has also put out his own statement congratulating President Trump. What do you think that relationship, starting in South Africa and extending to the continent, is going to be?
Everything with Donald Trump in all of these relationships is transactional. It's all about what he can get out of the relationship for the United States, and it often, in his mind, relates to finances. Yeah. Is America going to be better off out of any agreement that we strike? I do think, and we talked earlier in the week about President Ramaphosa's relationship with Vladimir Putin and with the Russian government.
You read my mind. You read my mind, Simon.
He's going to get a more sympathetic hearing.
Allow me to interrupt, because when you say President Trump and how he relates to other world leaders, I suppose specifically in Africa, his relationship is transactional. So does that suggest that President Ramaphosa can get away with saying Vladimir Putin and the Russian federal state are a friend and ally of South Africa without really getting him upset in
I
here.
think he will have a much easier ride, President Ramaphosa, on that issue with a Trump administration than he would have had with a Harris administration and that he has had with the Biden administration. I think that we know that Donald Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin is of an entirely different nature than the relationship that Joe Biden has had with him. There are obviously deeply held suspicions in this town about the nature of that relationship, but President Ramaphosa is not going to find himself on the outs at the White House, the National Security Council, the State Department, because of his relationship with President Putin, in the same way as the South African relationship has come under enormous tension while Joe Biden's been in the White House over that issue.
Simon Marks, thank you very much for that analysis. Well, we are going to have lots of these coming up because it is that day when Americans really show us who they want in the West Wing here. Vuyo, we're going to take a short break now, and when we return, Vuyo will be back with the latest headlines.